Good morning, everybody. Those who are here, I think we're just admitting people into the webinar. And so we'll give it a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. And as you're arriving, it would be great if you typed into the chat where you're from. We always like to get a sense of every place, and sometimes we know you, and sometimes one of our panelists is from your state. Oh, Kamala Lewis is here. Hi, Kamala. Shaker Heights. Oh, and Scott, you're here. That's terrific. Scott Kowanowski from the bar in New York City, who we're going to call on after a panelist has some interesting stuff to say about what's happening in New York or what has happened. I just saw someone from Oklahoma City from a department called Strong Neighborhoods. That sounds very intriguing. We should talk. Hi, Emily from NeighborWorks America. Emily Powell. South Bend. Tracy from the Able Foundation. I really enjoy the research that you commission. I mean, to be honest, I'm really talking about Alan Malik's study that he did for the Able Foundation on, what's happening with neighborhoods in Baltimore. Anyone who's on the phone who's into taking a really close look at sort of who's moving in and who's moving out in neighborhoods in Baltimore. It was very interesting. And one of the big findings is that Black middle-class households are choosing the suburbs over and over and over again. Disaster relief at Legal Aid in Greenville. Okay. Everyone loves Alan Malik and his work. It's true. It's true. Erie, Pennsylvania. I haven't ever worked in Erie, but I have some colleagues who have done a fair amount of work. Ida in Chicago. Hi, Evan. I grew up downstate Illinois. Okay, we're up to 91. Jill, were you on our call on Tuesday? Was that Tuesday? I think it was. Yes, you were. I knew it was unlikely for me to meet two people from Waterville, Maine in 1 week. Oh, great. Tracy posted the Alan Malik report. I'm telling you guys, even if Baltimore is not where you're from, just to read his methodology and how he came up with these findings will make you want to do the same thing in your community, and just very, very interesting. Oh, Ian, but I did meet two people from Maine, even if they're not from the same place, City of Sanford. Okay, terrific. Well, it looks like we're still adding a few people. Atlanta Legal Aid. I'm wondering how all the legal aid folks heard about this webinar. I think one of our panelists must have sent the info out on their networks. And yes, Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Baltimore is a great city. It sure is. Okay, well, I'm just going to get started on our opening slides. So my name is Marcia Nudland. I am one of the organizers for the National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative's Community of Practice, and I will explain what that means in a second. You can go ahead and advance. So Middle Neighborhoods is a national initiative. That's focused two parts. The national initiative is focused on, mobilizing attention to the issue of middle neighborhoods which, as we'll talk about in a second, despite most people thinking that they're perfectly fine and can just be kind of on autopilot, they actually have downward trends overall, and there's a lot to be concerned about there. The national initiative really focuses on research, policy analysis, communications, and advocacy. That's coordinated by the National Community Stabilization Trust, NCST. Some of you may know NCST. It was an organization that was formed during the foreclosure crisis to help facilitate foreclosed property, to benevolent developers. The community of practice is the other half of our initiative, and I am one of the people who helps organize that. It's an informal network. We have about 300 practitioners right now involved in that, as well as some researchers and policymakers, everyone who's interested in or working in middle neighborhoods. And we just do a lot of webinars like this one, referrals. People call me and ask me who else is working on something they're working on. So we make a lot of connections. Site visits, we can help facilitate virtual site visits. We do phone calls and larger group events. Sometimes looks like we're going to be doing a virtual national event in August. NeighborWorks America is the support to the community of practice. And we want to encourage you to go to our website, middleneighborhoods.org. At the bottom of any web page, you can join the community of practice, or you can just choose to get on our mailing list for the newsletter. So I just have 2 quick slides to go through for those of you who have been in Middle Neighborhoods 101, which we also offer usually every month. These are just some opening slides you've heard before, but just to give the rest of us sort of a taste for what we're talking about when we say middle neighborhoods. We're mostly built for families with children, so they're mostly single family housing. They tend to still be well more than 50% owner occupied, but when we look at the long-term trends, that has been slowly eroding. One of the big issues is that the housing stock is aging. It's still, in acceptable condition, but it tends to lack the features and updates that today's home buyers are looking for, which creates kind of a problem in terms of who the next generation of owner occupant buyers are. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing that erosion of homeownership rates. The property values, in some cases, particularly in more southern and western cities, gentrification is an issue. So it's the work tends to be more focused on making sure that people who are in the neighborhood can stay in the neighborhood, and that we create some permanently affordable home ownership or rental housing options in the neighborhood as things start to heat up. In most of the places where our community practice members work now, the issue is more one of a decline of property values, to the point that there are appraisal gaps that sort of inhibit owners from making the updates and repairs needed to keep the house in really great condition so that it could attract another home buyer. Most of our members, as I said, don't see hyperinflation of housing prices a risk right now, but I think I haven't talked to anybody anywhere who this year isn't feeling restriction in the market and really worried about how people are bidding up prices. One of the interesting things about middle neighborhoods is they tend to be more racially and ethnically diverse than either high-income neighborhoods or very low-income neighborhoods. Go ahead, ma'am. So why we're worried about them is, I've covered some of it. They are faltering. Even if you can drive by at 30 miles an hour and it seems like things look okay, they're starting to lose their ability to attract replacement owner occupants. They are definitely losing their ability to generate the home values that support quality maintenance, repairs, and updates, and that create, I'll jump to the last one, the home equity that, we were all encouraging renters to buy homes so that they could start to develop some assets and some intergenerational wealth for their families. And when houses aren't maintaining their value against inflation, that can become, not a great investment. And one of the reasons that we're talking about the topic today is that this is another place where people can lose intergenerational wealth and a family home. Also, we see that they're a little, they're starting to attract some of the more irresponsible investors, depending on the value of homes. I often observe that the worst of the investors will target the one bathroom houses in a neighborhood because owner occupants want 2 bathrooms at least. So they'll pick the houses that are of the least value, that are the greatest mismatch with what today's home buyers want. And they'll go after those and start to, express those irresponsible investor behaviors. And most important of all, as people move out and we have a more transient population in the neighborhood, the sort of built-in long-term institutions of engaged residents, the neighborhood association, or just relationships among families who have lived in the neighborhood for a long time start to erode, and you need to rebuild that social fabric. So that's the whole middle neighborhood thing. So let's switch in. Oh, just want to give a shout out at this, at our website or at this direct link. We have a mapping tool. So if you want to sort of play around and explore where the middle neighborhoods are in your community, you can go look on this website. There's a lot of different scenarios on the left side of the screen in terms of what percent of AMI income you want to look at and whether you're comparing it to the city, the region, or national. And I believe, I know David Sanchez is on this call. Have we launched the addition of race and ethnicity? I think that we have. So that you can also, we're doing a lot of work around Black middle neighborhoods in particular, trying to learn more about them because they have faced very different histories and sets of, challenges over the years. And so, we have, David says, the map now includes information on the share of population that is Black or African American. So we definitely wanted to be able to see that. So go on the map. I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so today we're talking about heirs property issues, and we'll hear a lot about what that means. Their first speaker today is, well, I'll name them in a minute, but we're going to do like sort of an overview nationally of the issue of heirs property. We find, especially in Black middle neighborhoods, but it impacts all kinds of neighborhoods, and we'll even find out from Jennifer, rural communities where estate planning has not been done in advance, and we find that multiple heirs inherit a property, which can create not only, a scenario that keeps that property in limbo or prevents it from being rehabbed because everyone has to sign off on a rehab loan, or perhaps there was no one was identified as an heir to a property, and for multiple generations have been living in that property and now don't have their name on the title, which also creates problems. I've observed this in neighborhoods I've worked in, for many decades now. So we're going to talk about a national perspective, about some sort of simple and straightforward outreach strategies that Jennifer does in her region of the country, and anyone could probably reach out and start implementing tomorrow. And then we're going to talk about building a web-based campaign that's really interesting, that's a little more proactive outreach. And then we're going to do some Q&A at the end. So our speakers are Shakisha Morgan, who is an estate planning and probate attorney with the Griffin firm. And I feel like Shakisha's in Montgomery County.
Prince George's County.
Prince George's, okay, next door.
Very close to the Montgomery County line, though.
Okay.
About a mile from my office.
That's right. So she's in the greater DC Baltimore area, and she knows that territory. And then we have Jennifer Connell, who I referred to, who's an attorney with Legal Aid of Northwest Texas. So she has both urban and rural areas in her, sort of territory. And John Kern is the Advanced Planning Project Coordinator for the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. So similar stomping grounds to Shakisha, but he's been doing a really interesting outreach project where he said this himself, that the lawyers hired him because they can't talk to regular people. So we'll see if Shakisha can meet that challenge.
No offense, please, no offense. Good God.
None taken.
So let's get started, I think, with Shakisha. And we're going to turn over. She's going to take on screen sharing and start to show her slides. There we go.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here to talk to you all about creating intergenerational wealth with estate planning. There's a lot of different things that we can talk about, so I'm going to keep it pretty high level, but my hope is that you're going to get some education here today that inspires you to take action. All right. So I do want to start with a little bit of education. First thing I want to know is whether you know how many people, and I'm going to say this weirdly, right, because I'm an estate planner, but are prepared to die. Now, it's an inevitable thing that we're all going to do, but one of the most impactful things that we can do during our lifetime is to do estate planning so that when we pass, we set our stuff up to be able to smoothly go from us to the next generation, and then the next generation does the same. The problem, though, is that most people do not have an estate plan. In fact, 50% of US adults die without a will, which means that at least half of the families in the United States, when someone dies, are dealing with the complexity, the cost, and the confusion of the court system when it comes to dealing with their loved one affairs. But when we start talking about communities of color, that looks even worse, right? And this is something that absolutely contributes to the racial wealth gap, and it's something that people need to be more proactive about. So when we talk about Black adults specifically, 70% of Black adults die without a will. And so when we're talking about the transfer of property from generation to generation, what we need to do is we're also seeing that, like similarly in other different areas of our economy, there is a disparity here. And so even when we talk about these issues, we also have to be sensitive to the fact that in different communities, it plays out differently. And so when we talk about preparing ourselves for wealth creation, we need to shift into intentionality. And intentionality means that we're becoming educated about what the issues are, what we can do. We are partnering with organizations and individuals who are going to help us to create this wealth, and we're taking action, right? So you're here today, but my hope is that all the information you get from today, it inspires you to do something. And everybody's inspiration comes from a different place. So this is my family here, right? My family is immigrants. My parents immigrated from the small island of Jamaica, if there's anybody else who has foreign parents in here. And they had 3 wonderful daughters. Their favorite is the middle daughter. I don't know if you can tell that she is also the one speaking to you. And then we also have the next generation that's here. So when I think about what I need to do as an individual, I consider those that I want to benefit, those that I love. And so I think about what it is I need to do. So I'm going to do a high level review here of some education, which starts with what is it that we can do and how does it affect things? So those of us who are on the call who are adults, everybody should have an estate plan, literally everybody. And there are foundational documents that everybody should have as a part of their estate plan. They include a durable power of attorney for legal and financial affairs, which means that if I am unable to act to enforce my rights or to manage my finances, somebody that I trust, I have given them the legal authority to literally stand in my place, to access my bank account, sign contracts, do all sorts of things, which can include taking action related to any property I have. I can't tell you how many times we have had clients come to us and they're in the middle of renegotiating, the terms of their mortgage, or, they're trying to do 531 exchange, they're trying to do all these things related to their property and something happens to them. But because they don't have any documents in place to let someone else stand in their place that they trust to continue those things, very often property is lost. Then we have what's called a healthcare packet. It includes like a healthcare power of attorney. It includes talking about who can access your medical records, what happens to your body after you pass, and it empowers someone to advocate for your medical care. Because not only, if something happens to us during our lifetime, not only should we be considering what happens to our finances, but we should be considering what happens to ourselves. And then finally, we have a last will and testament, which empowers someone to manage your affairs after you pass. This document is extremely important because, like I said, the court process gets kicked off. But at least if you have a last will and testament, also known as a will, you've probably heard of it in the shorthand, then that enables you to be able to guide what happens during the court process. Who gets to go to court on your behalf after your debts and and expenses are paid? Who inherits from your estate? And so, especially when you're talking about things like property transferring from generation to generation, you can be very intentional about how that property can transfer, even if you do these few things. But if we talk about wealth creation, there are also additional estate planning tools that can be used. Things like trusts, things like operating agreements to make sure that our businesses, if we have our businesses, that they can transfer from one generation to the next. Trusts are typically very scary for people. People feel like, hey, trusts are for really rich people. They're for the Bill Gates of the world. They're for, the Oprahs of the world, but that's not true. Trusts are really just a tool. So really, when you think about what it is you want to do, sometimes it is helpful to use a trust to do that. But I always recommend that you work with a professional, because a professional could tell you, do you actually need a trust to do this? If so, here's how to set it up, or you may not need it at all. But let's talk about why we're here today, right? Let's specify it to property. Property is one of those things that is such a great tool for wealth creation, but the way that things have gone in the past, unfortunately, a lot of people don't either trust the court system, and so they try not to be too involved in what happens to their estate, or they simply don't realize the laws that impact what happens to someone's property when they die. And so this is why one of the things when it comes to tools for wealth creation is really thinking about how to transfer real property from one person to the next. There are a number of different tools you can use. There are transfer on death deeds, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, like DC and Virginia. There are life estate deeds that you can use. There's even ways that you can set it up that if you buy a property with someone, titling the property in such a way that if something happens to one of the owners, that you're ensuring that that property stays out of court, and making sure not to have it subject to certain kinds of creditors and things like that. But you can also use trust, right? People put properties into trust and then talk about how they want it to move from generation to generation. So there are a number of different tools you can use, but all of it comes down to intention. What do I want to do? If what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're saving property to go from one generation to the next, some people, the only thing they have to transfer from one generation to the next is their property. And so that's why I highlighted this, because it's really important to be intentional about how you do it. And so there are a number of organizations. There are private attorneys, there are nonprofit organizations, there are bar associations that offer assistance in terms of helping you to do it in the right way. So let's go into that. Let's talk about partnerships, right? One of the organizations that I love that's doing really great work right now is the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals. And their goal is, they're a nonprofit. They are a collaborative economic development organization for financial and estate planning professionals committed to bridging the racial wealth gap by creating, conserving, and channeling wealth in Black communities. The truth is that when we talk about losing property from generations to generations, a lot of times Black communities are at the short end of the stick. But the truth is that Black communities are not the only communities at the short end of the stick. There are white communities, there are Asian communities, there are Latinx communities that are all impacted by not being able to understand the rules that apply and take action related to it. So when you're thinking about partnerships, even if you feel like you don't have the money to do it, reach out to someone and see if you can get help, right? John is going to talk about the work that his organization does. I love what they do because they offer assistance to those who are low income. For those who have more complex estate planning issues that they need to do, then that's when you can go to a private attorney who can help you to work through these issues. And when you work with them, you're not just working with an estate planner, right? There are other organizations that can help you to think about wealth creation. So real estate professionals, you're talking about financial professionals, you're talking about organizations that can help you find an attorney. You're talking about insurance organizations, right? Life insurance is a great wealth building tool that if there is a home that still has a mortgage, but you want it to transfer, maybe the person you're leaving it to, you also leave them a life insurance policy that helps them to pay off the mortgage, right? There are many different ways that you can do it. Now, if you think that you need a private attorney, there are different organizations that are doing it. Here locally, I work with these wonderful women at the Griffin firm. And the fun fact is that my boss up there at the top right, Amy Griffin, is actually the founder of the Association for Black Estate Planning Professionals. And we work not just with clients, but also with organizations, also with other financial advising partners to help people to create wealth, right? Because you can't create wealth unless you're intentional about transferring wealth. And so when we talk about these sort of things, we've talked about education, we've talked about partnerships, but let's talk about action, because it is not enough to just know what you think you might want to do. It's not enough to keep it up in your head, but it's more important to get it down on paper. I'm sure John will be able to tell you all, I'm sure Jennifer will be able to tell you all that people's wishes don't really matter that much. The truth is that when someone dies, the laws apply. And if the laws are not applying, that's only because someone has intentionally written the type of documents that are legally enforceable for things to happen. But let's talk about this inequity a little bit, right? Action has been taken not just by individuals, but also by organizations around the country. The Uniform Law Commission is one of these organizations, and they are actually working on something called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. The goal of the act is to preserve wealth passed to the next generation in the form of real property, so houses and land, making sure that those things can be passed on from one generation to the next. In fact, the work that they do is so important that so far 18 jurisdictions have actually enacted a version of the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. Some of those jurisdictions are Virginia, New York, Florida, South Carolina, Texas, the US Virgin Islands. So there are people getting to work on this. And there are now 8 additional jurisdictions where that legislation has been introduced. That includes the District of Columbia, it includes North Carolina, it includes California. And so people are getting the work done. So if you are interested in finding out if your jurisdiction is one of those that has enacted the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, I actually created a bit.ly link that you can go to. So it's bit.ly/UPHPA enaction. It's right there at the bottom of the screen. And I think it's going to be really helpful for you. And let me just, those of us from Maryland, let me just go ahead and just tell you that we have not. However, the Maryland Bar Association, the Estates and Trusts section, we have actually formed a work group to work on enacting the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act here in the great state of Maryland. So we are not sleeping. We haven't enacted it yet. We haven't introduced it yet, but we are taking action. So we are working on that. And so it's important. For those of you who are not aware of what heir property is what happens when someone dies without a will and they have multiple heirs. Maybe they have let's say they have 5 children. When they die, and if they own real property, that means each of the 5 children has what's called an undivided interest in that property. Undivided meaning that if one of those children dies, their interest in the property doesn't automatically go to the other 4. So each of the 5 have an undivided interest in the property. And let's say each of the 5 have 5 children. And over the course of the generation of the original 5 children, nobody legally transfers the property from the parent to the kids. So now all those generations have died. You've got 25 grandchildren, and now 25 grandchildren have each an undivided interest in that property. What that does is it makes the property extremely vulnerable and unable to be passed from generation to the next. And I can tell you right now, we have a few clients where we are working with Heir Property. And the example I just gave you is not one that's made up. That is actually a set of clients that we have right now, that we're trying to help them work through clearing title for the property so that the family can benefit. And it's just one of those things that becomes more and more complicated from generation to generation. So you should do something right now. And I'm going to give you an example of a wonderful woman named Osceola McCarty, because all of this doesn't matter unless you actually take action for yourself. And so Osceola McCarty is actually the most famous benefactor of the University of Southern Mississippi. She was a washerwoman from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. She didn't have any children, but she was a saver. And so she took care of herself during her lifetime, but she actually worked with partners, financial advisor at a bank and an estate planner, and she established a trust. That trust took care of her while she lived. And because she worked with them, when she died, there was $150,000 in that trust that she left to colored students at the University of Southern Mississippi who could not pay for college. Imagine the change for those students' lives because of the decision that Osceola made to be intentional about wealth creation. And this is something that we all can do, right? Her life can motivate the rest of us. That you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be super knowledgeable about all the laws, but you have to be willing to be educated. You have to be intentional about creating good partners and then intentional about taking action. So I'm excited again. Thank you all for having me so much for this time before you all. If you want to contact me, my name is Shakisha Morgan. I am the Maryland practice lead of the Griffin firm. Our phone number is 855-574-8481, or you can email me directly, shakisha@tgf-pllc.com. Thanks for having me.
Wow, thank you, Shakisha. She had quite a job handed to her to cover all of the high-level national scene, introduce the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, which is an organization I only recently learned about and I'm super excited about. I can tell you've done this a few times before, Shakisha. It's no wonder that you are your parents' favorite child. Okay, so let's we're now having Jennifer Connell key up her presentation, and I learned about Jennifer sort of through the actual chair of our National Steering Committee, who is Lori Schwartz, who is the director of probably the planning department, maybe the neighborhoods department for the city of Plano, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth, but it has at least 80,000 people living in it in itself. And I think Jennifer's going to tell us about her whole territory, but she has delivered estate planning clinics to probably HOAs in Plano, as well as other municipalities that are in her territory. So Jennifer Connell is with Legal Aid in Northwest Texas.
Yes.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. As Marcia said, my name is Jennifer Connell. I'm a staff attorney with Legal Aid in our Denton office. Denton is a suburb of Dallas. Legal Aid serves 114 counties in Texas, and a huge part of our practice is working towards outreach, and not outreach just for, sorry, my slide's not moving. Just one second. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, yeah, so a lot of our outreach is intended for community partners, which would be organizations like yourself, or straight to the clients, boots to the ground kind of thing. You'll hear me say that quite a bit. And the reason that we do this is even within the community partners that we work with, we find that a lot of them don't, it's our job to stay up on the law, not theirs. And so they're not utilizing maybe the best resources for their clients in terms of estate planning, in terms of educating them. And so I always encourage people in the community partners, reach out to us. I will come, I will drive wherever, And if I don't, if it's one of the other 114 counties, somebody will, because we want to let you know that we're here. We're very passionate about estate planning and protecting property. We actually, some of our bigger offices, our Fort Worth office, the Denton office, and many of them have a dedicated person who works to do these outreach, to set up these clinics, to have us go to these events and do community education. Because outreach is just crucial. I mean, everything that Shakisha said is so valuable, and most people don't hear it. Most of the community partners don't, or the clients. And so, yes, we go straight to our clients, but like I said, we also work with other organizations in order to do this outreach, both urban and rural. I myself have hosted clinic and webinars on wills and estates, housing issues, title issues, but it goes beyond that. If you have clients who need guardianships, family law, expunctions, non-disclosures, consumer law, I mean, that's what we're here for. And I don't know an attorney at a legal aid organization who is not passionate about what they're doing. In terms of setting up, if you want to work with a legal aid to set up a clinic, I've gone to many venues. I've gone to local VFWs, community colleges, libraries are very big, in some of the more urban settings, the recreation centers. I've even done them at clinics or local hospitals, which I especially find helpful for estate planning because, you know, one hospital I went to is called the Better Breathers Club, and they were all dealing with COPD. And they wanted someone to educate them about end-of-life documents. They had never talked about that before. So I was able to work with the hospital coordinator to go in and meet with them, you know, on their little weekly meeting and go over everything. And I ended up getting like 4 or 5 clients from that I was able to get full estate planning packets done. So it's little things like that, you know, and food banks are another big one. You wouldn't think that people come into the food bank, you know, to think about legal issues, but I don't know how many have said, oh, I'm having issues with my land, or, oh, I'm having issues with this or that, or, you know, I'm not doing well. And it's just, you have to get out there to see them. And legal aid is something we are here to help you do that. Generally, if you want to find your local legal aid agency, you could check with your state bar association. Most of them will list the local legal aid on their website. Once you find them, you can call the main branch. For us, it's our Fort Worth office, and you can ask to speak with whoever would be in charge of outreach. Sometimes there's dedicated staff for that. Sometimes it's an attorney. It's going to be different for every legal aid agency. You can also inquire as to already established clinics. Our office hosts 3 a month. We have 2 that are rural and 1 that is for the Denton, which is more populated. But also ask about availability to set up a new event. You know, are you having maybe a health fair? Are you having, you know, like a housing forum? We've done all of those things. And so we fit in where we need to go. And so just let us know how we can do that. Specifically, I will share, I live in a very rural community, and it is much more difficult to get in touch with the rural clients and the rural community partners. You know, everybody's more spread out, you know, there's just very close knit, but you have to know who to talk to get things done. So it can be difficult to ascertain a reliable contact to reach out to. The other issue with the rural clients is the limited access to technology. You know, even we serve indigent clients, but even, you know, other individuals who are out in these, like myself, I had internet issues this morning. It's not always that easy for me to get online and check things. And so how do you reach them? The social media is not all that reliable. You know, they're not, you know, checking listservs or anything like that. I've had numerous tell me they don't have email at all. The other issue is, you know, if they live out here and I work in the Denton office, many of our indigent clients can't afford the gas to drive all the way down there to meet in person. And then again, the limited venues, you would have to get creative, like the VFW or maybe a local church. We have one in a rural county where we go to the Baptist church once a month. And so you just got to kind of get out there and talk to people and let them know you're there. You know, the Denton office specifically, we serve 5 counties, 4 of which are rural. And I've actually driven out to all of these places to say, hey, we're here. We can come out and do a clinic. We can do this. And most of them even say, well, I didn't even know y'all came out here. And it's a matter of getting out there and getting your name out there so that they get this information. Again, reliable contacts that I have found have been churches, libraries, county clerks are really great. They'll put flyers up and let you know. The local courts, specifically in terms of property issues, I have found the county appraisal districts to be helpful, because if somebody comes in and maybe they haven't quite cleared title and they're trying to get a tax exemption that they are owed and they're living there, the appraisal district will say, call legal aid. Maybe they can help you get on to where we can put that exemption on and not foreclose for a tax purpose. County health fairs are a big deal. Rural people love to go out to these fairs. There's so many vendors and just people there with information, and they will come around and they will talk to you. I mean, 3 or 4 hours we spend at those. Community colleges are a good place to drive out and meet them if you want to have a clinic there. There's generally at least one in each of the rural counties. Like I said, the local hospitals or clinics. I stay in touch with what we have is called the Texoma Council of Government. And it's just a group of counties that sets up events and things like that. So I stay in touch with them. I stay in touch with the food banks, the United Way, and maybe your area will say, hey, we're doing this event. Can you be part of it? And so it's just a really good way to reach people that you can't just go knocking door to door, especially in a rural setting. Like I said, the technology issues can be difficult. The social media, it's better, but it's still difficult to get a reliable response from them. We just kind of have to work around that and do everything we can. That has been especially tricky, during the pandemic, and everything's on Zoom, and I have to get the hearing, on Zoom, but I do everything that I can to work with them. So if you're in a rural area and they need help and you're helping them with these estate planning documents, what I have found, especially during the pandemic, is most of the rural city halls, they'll notarize a document for them and provide the witnesses that are necessary for that. And they'll do it free of charge. And I didn't realize that until then. So instead of having someone drive 80 miles to my office, I'm able to set them up there. And if I have questions or concerns about maybe their understanding of how to execute it, I'll drive out there and meet with them. So that's one way to kind of get around that. The same thing with the inability to afford travel. I work with local cities, like I said, to find notaries. I send them everything with prepaid envelopes so they don't have to worry about paying something. I leave the applications at targeted spots when I'm kind of out there, boots on the ground again, talking to clerks and things of that nature, just blasting it out there so that they know. And it doesn't even have to just be a general application. If you have, like in this case, it would be, we can help you with title. Did you know we do this, 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 and this? And it's a 1-page, very simple worksheet, but it gets them to call. And that's the most important thing. Again, those are all the venues that you could call. And you can also, if you want to call a legal aid and have them reach out to do that, we do that as well. So we're very much about the community partnership. There are also times that, because we're based on income, that we're not able to accept a client who is slightly over the limit. And we have an entire department dedicated to that, to find pro bono attorneys. And I think, if you have a client who is having those issues, we have found it helpful that we can reach out, because most private attorneys enjoy doing some pro bono work, and it looks good and it's good for their career. And so if you reach out to them, call a county bar association. Are there any pro bono lists? Are there any attorneys who could do this? It's just all about networking and figuring out who is out there. And here is my contact information. I'm happy to discuss any of this more in length with you. I'm best right now via email. We're still working remotely via the pandemic, but I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I feel like in my entire housing career, it's never occurred to me to reach out to legal aid before and start to think about ways that I could be proactive about helping neighborhood residents protect their home and their wealth and just, be proactive about getting everyone planning so that all of the homes in the neighborhood are, their next second, third, and fourth acts are insured, and that they're going to be good for the neighborhood and good
Yes.
for the family. And I feel like all the steps you just gave us, I could go out and create a campaign or a limited plan right now. So thanks a lot for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. One of Peter Hoffman says recorder of deeds offices are a great referral source for his legal aid office on land title problems in particular,
Mhm.
which I know there's like a whole wing of this work that's just about, especially in the South, is where I tend to notice it, where there's farmland or just other kinds of land estates that are in real jeopardy because of, well, I'm sure that actually John's going to mention that, or one of our attendees later. So let's turn it over to John now. So John Kern, as I mentioned, is with the volunteer lawyers, let's see, of Maryland. Did I leave out one of the words in the title of your organization, John?
That's all right. Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service.
Yes, Maryland goes first. And he has done something that is really, I think, sort of a crossover between an amazing thing that's sort of crossover between community development and legal aid that I'm super excited about. So go ahead, John.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is so fantastic to be part of this group. Usually I'm kind of on my own out there and I have to go through everything, but now we've got a really nice intro to this. So I'm going to go through my presentation and hopefully just build on both what Shakisha and Jennifer have talked about. So we're MBLS. We're here in Maryland. The way our program works is we actually leverage attorneys pro bono hours. So you're supposed to do 50 hours a year pro bono in the state of Maryland. So folks will come to us, saying, hey, I want to practice, these different areas of law, but I've got no way to find family law clients or doing foreclosures, income tax, record expungement, and everything else that we do. So really, we're like a dating service for attorneys. So we sort of match folks up with clients. So they brought me on to do what's called the Advanced Planning Project. And Marcia said earlier that they were going out talking to the community and everybody was falling asleep. So they said, we got to bring somebody on that can kind of really develop an outreach strategy and say, hey, take some of this legalistic stuff and bring it down to earth, find out what's already happening out there and kind of plug into some of the narratives around a lot of what Shakisha has talked about, which is so exciting to me to hear a lot of that language happening. So that's what they did. And so I'd like to say, I'm not an attorney, but I like to say that I have all their strengths and none of their weaknesses. They hate when I say that. Okay, so like I said, we're MBLS just to see because there's a couple different prongs to this. So we're MBLS. The Department of Housing and Community Development here in the state of Maryland gave us a little bit of money to do really an outreach campaign and also set up some clinics. My project was already going, and I'd been going out for about 2 years talking about estate planning around the community, similar to what Jennifer was doing. Churches, block clubs, community associations, hospitals, and I'll talk through some of that strategy. But then they said, hey, look, let's make this a bit bigger. Their interest was around the tangled title problem and the deed problem. And I'm going to talk through why there's so much overlap with obviously estate planning, but then the tricky part of probate and estate administration, as we call it here in Maryland. They said, hey, here's a bit of money. We want to do an outreach campaign. We did billboards, we did buses. This title, My Home, My Deed, My Legacy, was actually a bunch of residents up in Park Heights and I just sort of sat down and talked about a lot of the conversations we've been having about estate planning, intergenerational wealth building, all of that. And they came up with this title, which I thought was great. And so they said, okay, we'll do the bus ads, we get some press on this, and then we'll also set up a website at the end, which I'll talk about at the end. So again, tangled titles, right? So my project actually came out of the foreclosure crisis in a way after 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, in which, we were getting calls, obviously, and we would ask folks, hey, who's got your mortgage? Who's your lender? And we'd work with them and talk to Wells Fargo and yell at them. But then, every now and again, we'd get a call from an older adult mostly, and they would say, I'm losing my house. And we would say, well, wait a minute, who's got your mortgage? And they say, oh, my mortgage is paid off. And we thought, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? How are you losing your home? And then really looking into this, we found out that these folks were in danger of going to the tax sale. And the connection between our tax sale system and Tangled Titles, really the through line here is that all of the programs at the state level, like the property tax credits, we have two in Maryland, the homestead and the homeowner's property tax credit. The homestead caps your property tax credit so that if your property value goes up over time, you're not going to see a skyrocketing assessment over a time, which is great as an anti kind of displacement, anti-gentrification tool. A lot of cities probably too far gone, but in Baltimore, we have a chance to stay ahead of this. We're already seeing aggressive redevelopment of the city, which again is not necessarily a bad thing because we have historic disinvestment, but we need to be very careful. So that's an incredibly powerful tool for homeowners to say, hey, and we have organizations that are organizing around this, saying, let's go door to door, get these property tax credits so that people don't get pushed out. The thing is, though, if you have a Tangled Title, if the deed to the property is not in your name, you're not going to get access to these programs, right? So this, again, Shakisha did a great job talking about this, but if you don't do any of this planning and you end up, in what they call intestate succession. So, when you're in a Tangled Title situation, living in a house, because, look, we have, and I'm sure this is true across the country, a lot of multi-generational families living in the same house, right? Grandparents, kids. Somebody passes away and everybody just thinks that the house passes automatically, right? And then why shouldn't they? Look, it is their property. I want to be real clear about this because we've actually gotten into some real tiffs with our Register of Wills and other folks that see this a different way. They're paying the property taxes, they're paying the water bills, they're trying to keep the roof on. It is their home. It's just that there's this legal entanglement, right? So some people say, oh, they're inheriting a free house or something. There's some real, I think, kind of racist, sort of dated language around this. So I hope everybody's ears perk up when they hear stuff like that. These are the custodians of our homes. It's just that they have this legal entanglement. So then they can't get all the repair programs that we have. A lot of older adults are trying to age in place. We have the HUBS program, the housing upgrades to benefit seniors here in Baltimore City. You can get grab bars, all kinds of things. None of those programs you can get if you've got this Tangled Title situation going. And then, of course, after you pass your children to lose your legacy, and Shakisha did great. That's the real big one here, is that we're seeing massive land loss. Let me just talk for a second about our tax sale, because today is April 29th. Tomorrow is April 30th. April 30th is the last day that residents of Baltimore City have to pay their city bills, any kind of debt liability to the city, below $750. It used to be $250. We've lobbied a lot on this. It's now up to $750. If they are over $750, they go to our city's tax sale. Now, there are some of these around the nation. I just want to talk the way about ours works. Basically, this is an investment scheme set up for outside speculators like Jared Kushner types to get a 12% return on owner-occupied properties. If they're non-owner occupied, they can get 18% back. But basically, we're privatizing debt collection. So we say, okay, Ms. Jones, you're $300 behind on your tax bill. We're going to sell a lien to this outside investor. They're going to pay that lien, and then you got to pay them back plus the interest. And let's be real clear, the investors have no interest in taking the homes. They target owner-occupied properties because there's an 85% redemption rate. Redemption, quite a word to talk about this. We could get into that and the history of the redemption movement. Look at your history, post-Civil War and the Reconstruction period. But anyway, they have no interest in taking the properties. They're going after our older homeowners because they just want the 12%. So what also leads to the vacant and the blight problem is that oftentimes if the folks don't redeem, the investors don't take title to the property. So then it just sits there and liens pile up, it goes vacant, and then you get more blighted properties, which again, bring the properties down. So this is a predatory, antiquated, opportunistic, disgusting investment scheme. And we're doing a lot of work to try to transform this system. So we put together a couple of partnerships here. This is pretty recent, like within the last I guess it's been like 6 months. It's MBLS, it's us, but then a group called Parity run by Bree Jones. who's in the front, and then Fight Blight Baltimore, my colleague Nika Nandi, who both are fantastic leaders in the city, really two of the sort of the best folks working in this area. Bree's Group Parity is an incredible kind of equity anti-displacement development tool. She's a small developer. She's actually from the Bronx, but came down here to do this in Baltimore. And she's doing great work on this. She's identifying homeowners on the front end, and then she's rehabbing vacants and has this incredible system for getting them financing and everything. So it's an amazing model. And then Nika Nambi is an incredible data person. She's been doing research on blight. She's like the person to go to about blight prevention. And her and I crossed paths just because we were talking about property taxes, estate planning, tangled titles. And she said, well, we gotta start working on this. So we raised, this slide's a little old. So again, tax sales tomorrow. We raised actually $61,000 across the city. These are just people raising money saying, I gotta save Miss Jones' house. And we actually paid property taxes down below 750 for 34 homeowners just yesterday. So we're keeping them out of tax sale. And then trying to reform the whole system. And we're taking a pretty comprehensive look at all of these, because I know that Shakisha and I are all about long-term intergenerational wealth building. And at the same time, we've got to get ahead of this. We've got to look at what are the mechanisms that they are taking property. And so we thinking about grand rent, thinking about contract lending, the whole history of kind of predatory financial instruments, zoning, land use. I mean, all of this stuff. We talked about property tax and then how debt is collected. So anyway, that's the SOS fund. It's a really neat partnership. And if anybody's any questions, I can talk to you more about what we're doing. But it's going pretty well. And these are all the things, and I can't talk through all this stuff. But we're looking at all of these things, and these are sort of all of the stuff that we think can be kind of leveraged, collaborated on to take a holistic approach to really community health. And this, a lot of this stuff I'm sure is familiar with folks on the call. We're looking at doing, obviously land trusts are taking off. We're looking at setting up a land bank. You can have that conversation. Community land control, and obviously the social equity bond. Dr. Lawrence Brown's work locally in Baltimore on filling up this appraisal and assessment gap, which is a really hard problem. That's for redevelopment. So thinking about a social equity bond, he's done great work on this. Anyway, so that's some of the things we're doing. So I just want to review quick the strategy as it goes back to estate planning. So I think we're pretty much on the same page with this, but in terms of the outreach, obviously there are the three main kind of documents that Shakisha went over. One of the great things that we were able to do was go in and pick up where people were already messaging. So Jennifer mentioned the hospitals. I couldn't agree more. That's a great idea. A lot of hospitals were talking about advanced healthcare directives when I was starting out. So I said, hey, great, I'll come and talk to you about advanced healthcare directives, but you've got to let me present on estate planning generally. I'm not just going to do healthcare directives. Let's do a complete estate plan while we're at it, because you really got to have all these documents in place. And I'm just going to talk through the other two, right? So obviously we ran into huge barriers around this. A lot of folks say, hey, look, I've got a will, so I'm set. I'm taken care of. It's all good. Or they may not have a will. Somebody did a financial power of attorney, So that's the kind of one document takes care of all. We had to really say again, and that's not just on the resident side. That's again, people's outreach strategies were a little bit myopic or siloed, depending on how you want to say it. We know the other stuff. I don't have a lot of money. This is for rich people. Word of mouth. Look, oral tradition. We know about all this stuff culturally. My goodness. But then really a lot of this is trust issues. And Shakisha mentioned this, but my goodness. Especially here in Baltimore, think about the vaccine rollout. This is there are incredible historical barriers. People are not stupid. They know the history around these things. And in the healthcare system, they know Henrietta Lacks. They know these names. They understand how their grandparents were swindled by contract lenders. I saw my colleague on from Chicago. We know how all the stuff on the South Side. People understand this and they are very protective. So you've got to get in and build the trust in the community, work locally, align yourselves with what all the great work they're already doing, and just say, hey, we're just trying to bring in this legal piece and leverage all the work you're doing, right? To come in and build that trust. So for the medical directive, I mentioned, everybody should do one. There's a lot of messaging around this. This is great. We just did mydirectives.com is online. Cool way to do one. It links up with the Maryland CRISP system. So you can have everything online. It's great. But again, hospitals. So start there and then just say, hey, can we paint the broader picture? financial powers of attorney, we were seeing, and I'm sure other folks are seeing this, a lot of problems with financial exploitation and elder abuse, right? So we know that this is a massive problem. I am in no way advocating that doing a financial power of attorney is a way to completely prevent financial exploitation. But as we know, the power of these documents, because really, what's estate planning all about? It's just about setting up relationships within the family, right? Legal relationships to your health, to your finances, to your assets, right? Those relationships are built within the family. The attorneys just do the paperwork. So it's really about what's going on with those relationships. And oftentimes with financial exploitation, we know stranger danger, right? We know about the scams and calls and the grandparent scams. Most financial exploitation happens within families, right? Because look, estate planning, it's a gray area. We're talking about a transfer of wealth between generations. So as you can imagine, things get a little, people are in caregiver roles, right? It's a lot of what we talk about. So if you assign financial power of attorney, it sets up just a much more solid relationship. You have that conversation with the attorney. There are not a bunch of people on bank accounts and all that stuff. We're going to talk about passing money, but it's just this one point person. So if somebody gets a weird call from somebody that says they want a cruise or something, they can ask their POA, or if that POA can look out for financial. So we have partnerships to talk about financial exploitation. I just wanted to lift up that issue. It's a massive issue. Billions of dollars lost every year with financial exploitation. The will, look, Shakisha did great. I mean, this is our stuff. This is who gets it. Everybody's got to do one. The joke is that, Mr. Aretha Franklin passed away without a will. James Brown didn't do a will. Apparently the soul community's got something about wills. Prince didn't do one. He was so diligent about his music, but didn't have a will. Dr. Martin Luther King didn't. I mean, they shot him. He might have done one later. But anyway, as a lot of folks don't do them. Got to get them in place. I think Shakisha covered it. I don't want to bore you with that. And then again, I don't want to get into this fire and brimstone, this oh my goodness, what happens if you don't do it? We all know it's an absolute mess. I'm much more of an optimistic, kind of a positive facing person as an organizer that talks about why to do it without scaring people or something. I just don't. But again, I think you've kind of garnered that it's an absolute mess if somebody ends up without a will. Other planning options, and we started talking about this, beneficiary designations, absolutely. And Shakisha mentioned, most of our clients are low income folks. So we think a lot about how to avoid probate. And that's really the kind of plan we want to set up, which is to say, look, the lion's share of the stuff in your estate, you can move around probate because probate is expensive, it's time consuming. So we want to set it up where you can move it around. So transfer on death deeds at the NBA. If you want to move a car, go to the NBA, file one on your own. It'll just move automatically. Payable upon death at the bank. A lot of folks put a bunch of people on their bank accounts with them. No need. Again, trying to pass money or trying to have them, do a financial POA, do the POA. If you want somebody to help you with money, if you want to pass money, do a payable upon death. That just means it's my money now, but these accounts are going to go to somebody else. And then we talked about insurance policy, stocks, bonds, whatever. But then the real important one here, they're all important, sorry. But the real big one, as we mentioned, the largest asset, and Shakisha said, often the only asset is the home. Life estate deeds. We're also looking at transfer on death deeds, absolutely. And I want to say a couple things about this. One of the clarion calls around Baltimore City when we were partnering with, a lot of the faith community, you'll hear from the pastors and the deacons and everybody, get your folks on the deed with you, pass the homes. Absolutely. I mean, great message, but remember, devil's in the details. So we want to be careful about adding heirs directly to a property because, you can hold them, joint tenants, you could do these kind of things. But one of the things to avoid is if an heir has any kind of debt liability and you put them on a property with you and the debt collectors try to come after that, you're going to get liens on the property. And we see this a lot. So we have to be careful not to just add people directly to the deed. The life estate deed is so great because it says this is our house now, but it will then pass after we pass away. The other one, it avoids Medicaid's 5-year look back period. And I don't know, I'm assuming this is kind of everywhere, but as folks know or don't know, if suddenly somebody needs to go, round the clock care, go to a nursing home, really needs help at end of life, right before they're transitioning, they may apply for Medicaid. Well, Medicaid has that spend down period where they're going to look back at 5 years of your financial history and whatever assets are in the estate, they're going to take a piece out of that estate. We see tons of homes lost this way as Medicaid goes to take homes, take a portion of the home, which means you got to liquefy that, you got to sell the house. A life estate deed can shield the property from Medicaid's 5-year look back period. If you do one today and you let 5 years go by, then you apply for Medicaid, they won't touch the house because they see, oh, wow, okay, you've committed to passing this on to the next generation. We don't want to go after that property, right? And I can get more into that, and it's wild and whatever, but it's another thing that we're very concerned about. All right, avoiding probate, here we go. So there we go. What do you have in place? There are the documents, definitely along with the other planning documents, thinking about beneficiary designation for sure. We talked a lot about this, but these probate issues are such a mess. We talked about Medicaid, obviously the heirs property, estates that have been closed. So we can kind of go through more if folks want to, but I think that point's been made. I don't want to labor it. This is this is kind of the campaign, and this is some of how the website looks. And basically we set it up like a kind of like a choose your own adventure. So you go to the website and it's myhomemydeed.org. And then when they get there, it says, is your name on the deed? And then they click on it and they can check. We have a link to the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. If it's on the deed, great. They're in good shape, do your estate planning. And then they go right that way, and we explain what all the documents are. Now, if your name is not on the deed, if they say, hey, wow, that's an aunt, or that's my grandmother, then it's going to be instructions on how we have to open up an estate and again, and look at that. So that's sort of, part of the strategy there. I can talk about a lot more barriers to the outreach, but I kind of wanted to make sure we got to questions to talk further about what we're doing. But again, I'm so happy to be here with these other hosts, and I'm such a goof. I don't have a final slide, although the call for registration number is my direct line. So that's my phone number, and I'll put my email, because I got to register people, but I'll put my email in the chat, and then we can hopefully all connect. I'm already want to connect with a lot of the things that I saw in the chat. So thank you so much. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, John. That was amazing. And I'm not going to let you get away completely with, I'm going to share my screen and kick over to show people your website.
Okay.
Because it is so cool. It's very simple, but it's just so cool. Okay.
Oh, there it is.
So here's the website, myhomemydeed.org. And I love that he worked with neighbors who represented his target audience for this to come up with the name. And it's just, is your name on the deed? So, and there's also in Spanish. So you scroll down.
That's Miss Cynthia. She's so great. We did these videos, wide angle media. We did a bunch of videos, and this is one. Her dog is hysterical.
Oh gosh. And then here, do you own your home? And you can click on the search button and go, I don't think I've ever tried that, but apparently it's hooked up to.
Come on. Yeah, it's linked to SSTAT. Should come up.
Tell us what SSTAT is.
The State Department of Assessments and Taxation. So you can do a real property search, and then it'll just show you the history of the deed, who's on it now. And then if you do a life estate deed, you'll see a little in parentheses life by the name.
Okay.
And you can see if you have the property tax credits there.
So that's terrific, right? To be linked straight into something, so you don't have to call somebody. I mean, it just removes a lot of the barriers right away. And I am a person who, it has got to be low friction if I'm ever going to do it. So imagine if I was a person who was older, not super comfortable with technology, didn't trust lawyers for very good reasons, of past history. It has to be frictionless. So you find out, and either you are on the deed or you are not on the deed. And so then it tells you, it clicks into this. If you do have your name on the deed, terrific for you. You need these other things too. Let's learn more about how you can do that. And if you're not, it lists, gives you some options. It's like a flow chart, but a friendly flow chart to get you through understanding where you're at right away without having to call anybody, and then knowing what to do next.
I saw a question in the chat. Is it only for Maryland? I mean, informationally speaking, no. I mean, anybody could hop on there, but that's true. I mean, right. It's not going to link you to your local state's Department of Assessment. I wish it would, but so it's, I guess, I don't know, quasi
that-
local?
Say that typically, you know, like every jurisdiction will have something like this, but you know, because we're not in those other jurisdictions, we're not aware of it. But usually, you can look up your state and like deed search or property tax assessment, and it'll give you a couple websites that might take you to a place where you can look up the deeds.
So that could be a great project for the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals to fundraise to create the national website. So you could first select your state. I'm always coming up with work for other people to do. So that's just, so isn't that a cool website, everybody? Okay, so oh, that's interesting. Question there. I'm going to pose Emily's question to our panelists to answer, and then I'm going to warn Scott Konowski. I'm going to call on you to talk about what you're doing in New York, Scott. But Emily asked, is there a way for lay people, in other words, not lawyers, to get a certification or training even on estate planning? Yeah, she says, I only have one sentence I'm confident saying, and then the rest of it is, you know. So she thinks she'd be more persuasive if she had more facts to share. One-on-one
So-
combos. Great question. Go ahead.
If I could speak to this, my only knowledge about certificates related to estate planning are through law schools. And so you probably either have to be a law student or something like, it's a little expensive, but I'm actually going to suggest something else.
Great.
I tend to tell people that if you want to be able to impactfully encourage other people to do estate planning, you have to do your own. Because by doing your own, you become intimately aware of the process, the different documents, the goal of them, how they play out. And that gives you the language that you need to tell people how to do it for themselves.
Very good point. And I will tell you, I finally broke down and called an estate planning attorney because planning this webinar made me so much more aware. It moved me from, I got to do that someday, to I got to do that now. So Scott Kowanowski, are you out there? Can you unmute yourself, or do we have to unmute you? Scott is with the City Bar Justice Center in New York City. He's the director of homeowner stability and LGBT advocacy projects. And he's been doing a lot of work in New York on this issue, including helping to get that new law enacted in New York State. Are you still there? Are you there, Scott? Or Anne, if you could try to find him in the participants list and unmute him if he needs to be unmuted. And possibly he had to take off before we finished. I am going to
He's
try.
actually here. Sorry, I'm just trying to find. I know I'm looking for his name in the list, so I'm searching.
Okay. I am going to try posting some. Let's see if this worked. Oh yeah, these are a few documents that he shared with me in advance about the UPHPA law and what the final law says in New York. A couple of great articles. See, I don't read the ABA journal, but it's like, oh, I bet there are a lot of great articles in the ABA journal.
You know, I'm here now. I don't think I'm
go
on
ahead,
the,
Scott.
I can speak, but I don't think you can see me
That's okay.
camera. But yeah, I mean, this is really super exciting. I mean, to hear all of you speak and just your own experiences and your own strategies, because, you know, I just kind of discovered this whole sort of predatory partition scheme that has been going on in our urban areas here in New York about 5 or 6 years ago. And, you know, I had a couple clients come to us, and they're heirs to, you know, these family intergenerationally held properties, and they'd been targeted by these investors. And you know, New York City is kind of unique because, well, maybe not that unique than from other urban areas, but we have, you know, historically Black and brown neighborhoods who have recently gone through rapid gentrification. And a lot of those properties had, they were subject to historic racial federal lending policies like redlining, and so they didn't have mortgages, and a lot of the people that lived in those homes and were on title, they didn't have access to estate planning services. And so, fast forward about 30, 40, 50 years, and you have, cousins and other heirs and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters, and the heirs of the original title holders who are residing in those properties, but title is still in the ancestor. And so you'd have these predatory investors who'd come around and they'd target, some distant cousin who's like off in LA or North Carolina or somewhere, and they get them to sell their fractional interest in the property for, pennies on on the dollar for its real worth. And so once they get that one tiny fractional interest, then they can commence a partition action. And this kind of all blew my mind because I got one of these cases in, and I run originally a foreclosure defense project at the City Bar Justice Center, which is part of the New York City Bar Association. And we weren't really focused on this stuff, but we get, like John did, we get cases of people calling us up and said, we're about to lose our property, what's going on? And so I did all the research, and partition law is really harsh. And because you have a right to partition if you own a fractional interest. And so, and anytime in New York, I don't know about what it's like in other states, but you get a small, something goes through judicial sale, then it only gets a fraction of what its true value is there as well. So there's a lot of loss of accumulated intergenerational wealth in these properties. There's a lot of things, and it just kind of blew my mind because the people that are being targeted are people in historically Black and brown neighborhoods. And so it became a real racial justice issue for us. And so I got some news coverage on it, and out of that, Thomas Mitchell, who's done a lot of work, he's a Black law professor in Texas. He worked with the Uniform Laws Commission and got the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act passed. And so he reached out to us, and we worked together in New York to get the UPHPA passed through the New York City Bar Association. But what we did was we modified the law because the law is really more focused on rural issues, like in the Black held properties in the South, historically Black held properties in the South. And so we wanted to get all these protections in there and for the urban context. And so things that we did is we added an alternative dispute resolution process that's within the court. That's similar to what we do in the foreclosure process in New York. We gave heir occupants or heirs a second opportunity to put in an answer because we know that folks don't know how to answer a summons and complaint when they're served with papers. But if they go to court, they go to one of these settlement conferences and they connect with legal services or they connect with the court personnel, they'll explain to them how to do it, and they can put in an answer and defend their rights. So there are all these really important changes that we made, I think, in my own opinion, because we worked on the law. But anyway, it's just really exciting to hear all the work that everybody else is doing. And, I'm going to be speaking with you folks there in Maryland next week and in greater detail about what we did here. But yeah, I mean, I just love the work that you all are doing.
Thank you, Scott. I had to unmute myself. It's Dr. Thomas Mitchell. Someone asked again for the name of the law professor in Texas, and I inadvertently posted it not to all of you. There we go. I'll do it this time. And, I think one of the things that the law protects against is something that I don't think any of us have explicitly said, but, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, when a property is left to multiple heirs, any one of those heirs could sell their interest to an investor, and that investor could force a sale. Is that right?
That's right. And that's what was happening in New York. So we were trying to get in there and intervene before that actually happened. And the good thing is, since then because the governor signed that bill into law in December of 2019. And then, 4 months later, we all went into lockdown because of COVID, which, also disproportionately impacted our communities of color. But the courts had stopped everything, the progression of these cases during that time. But even then, we've developed a lot of really good case law out of that, the passage of the UPHPA.
Terrific, terrific. Nidra, are you still here? I'm not seeing you in the list. She might have had to take off. I was just going to ask her, Nidra Sims-Fears is the executive director of the Greater Chatham Initiative in Chicago, which is a nonprofit organization that works to stabilize and strengthen 4 Black middle neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago. And I know that she kicked in like a very basic sort of campaign on an emergency basis because COVID had a devastating impact on people in her group of neighborhoods. So she was actually started a mini campaign to get people to sign transfer on death deeds, just to make sure that their homes were safe to, to transfer everyone with that. So that's something you can do if your state has that kind of deed. But I was going to ask her to talk about that. Anyway, I think she's gone. Let's see. Do we have any other questions from anyone? You can type them into the chat. If anyone sees one that I missed, any of our panelists, feel free to call it out. And then Amira asks, how can your program be piloted from tax sales? And I bet that question came in when John was speaking, maybe, but I don't know. I don't know enough to be able to direct that question. Is that meaningful to any of our panelists?
Piloted for? What was that?
Yeah, it's how can your program be piloted from tax sales?
Do you mean how can your property be protected from tax sales?
Maybe that's what happened.
That's what I'm thinking the question is. Do you want to, well,
go ahead.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about tax sales, there's actually quite a range of things you could be doing. I'm going to go back to my point about intentionality. One of the things that you want to do is you want to be looking at the finances of whoever the homeowner is, and also the finances of the inherited heirs, right? So the person that is going to be inheriting the property, let's talk about their finances, right? Because estate planning is about transferring the property, but sometimes it starts with being realistic about what is the status of the property. Does it have a mortgage? What are the taxes? Are the taxes behind? Have they been paid in time? And then who is the homeowner? Who is the one that's responsible for making those payments? So there's a couple things you can do, right? One of the things that I've told clients to do, and I mentioned it here, is that if you know that someone inheriting property is of a different financial situation, then don't just give them the property, but also give them make them the beneficiary of a life insurance policy, so that there's also money that transfers to be able to give them the ability to manage that property. Secondly, you want to keep the property out of the probate process. Whichever way you do it, you want to keep the property out of the probate process because it's going to complicate things. So if the property has a mortgage on it, during the probate process, someone's got to pay it, which then goes back to whether or not someone can pay it. When you're talking about the tax sale, someone's got to pay it. And so if there's other things they have to pay for, like the mortgage, it takes away the ability of just being able to focus on paying the taxes. Different kinds of deeds that are helpful, because one of the most powerful things when you transfer property outside of the probate process, it means that you can transfer it immediately. What does that do? That makes someone an owner immediately. What does that give them the ability to do? John talked about being able to qualify for certain programs, but even beyond that, it gives you the ability to do refinancing. Right? One of the most important things that you can do once a property has transferred from one generation to the next is, can I refinance this property so that I can afford to continue to pay what is owed on it? So it really is about, it's a multi-level process. Like, how do we pay for it right now? How do we ensure that the person who inherits it can pay for it? And then how do we ensure that it passes to them without the probate process and without any complications or added costs, taxes, debts, and all those sort of things that could take the property away and out of the family.
That's
Super
awesome.
good.
Can I just add quick, just from the policy level as well too? So a lot of times what happens is, most people pay their property taxes through their mortgage, right? They put it in escrow, it's paid, it's paid. They don't really think about it. Well, what happens is that, they pay off the mortgage, those bills still come twice a year. If this is in Baltimore State, I don't know what's happening in the rest of the world down there on the planet, but suddenly they've got these two enormous bills. Every city should at least be billing monthly. And people, especially people that are on a fixed income, should be paying, they can even do automatic payments. If they're on SSI, like there's ways to work this out. So this whole thing about privatizing this debt collection, it puts a completely undue pressure. Folks get behind on medicine. They're not trying to avoid property taxes. They're just trying to, they got their budget, so that they need medicine, whatever. So we need to make it as easy as possible to pay. And if they get behind, we need to enter into payment plans, get them financial assistance. We did a policy paper that I can try to put in the chat on a huge reform to the tax sale system.
Oh,
So,
excellent. That'd be great. I want to post, somebody made a comment that reminded me of something I really want to hear you guys speak about, and that's the issue of reverse mortgages. So what are the, okay, see, that is really, I think there's a bunch of us out there that didn't know that. So can you tell us why they're so dangerous, please? Or risky, or what?
you want to go again, Shakisha? I mean, I'll start. I mean, look.
You're on mute, John.
Sorry about that. There's a very, very narrow window in which I think that reverse mortgages are necessary. If really a person's living in a house and there is no one that they have to pass on that house, it's really just that, and they want to take a bit of equity. But they've got to know at the start, you are not getting the full value. I mean, these deals, you're not going to get the amount of equity you could get. So it's really a very, very narrow. But the thing is, in terms of heirs property, oftentimes there are all kinds of clauses and hidden texts in these deals where it makes it incredibly hard for the next generation. I mean, they're probably gonna have to refinance anyway, like once they get the property, but oftentimes first rights of refusal are in there and the bank ends up taking the property afterwards. And Shakisha mentioned property taxes. I mean, it's really a mess. So, again, very small situations where really, and apparently they're like benevolent reverse mortgages out there. Most of this stuff is pretty predatory.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I would tell anybody who is even thinking about doing a reverse mortgage to talk to a professional. Don't just talk to the bank, but talk to a professional unrelated to the people who would benefit from the fact that you've done this reverse mortgage, right? You want to make sure that you're as educated as possible, because I agree, there is like a very, 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 very small exception for people for whom that reverse mortgage, and I do mean little. If you've ever heard of a mustard seed, it's smaller than that. But there's a very, very small group of people where that would actually be beneficial. So you really want to make sure that, ultimately, like, I get it, right? People want to keep their houses. They want to age in place. They want to do those sort of things, but you want to do it in an educated way. So you always have to make sure that you're getting as much information as possible. And if you only think short term, then you are very, very possibly risking the ability for that house to be passed on to the next generation.
Okay, thank you for that. And this occurred to Anne and I in one of our prep calls with one of you panelists, but I just want to say it again, in the community development field, there is a lot of money, time, and effort and strategies around helping people buy a home, and lots of home buyer education going on. I am not at all clear that there is sufficient home buyer education in the pre-purchase situation about estate planning. And
Agreed.
It feels to me like it would be easy enough to create a module, because these things are taught in modules, that's about estate planning, that could really start to address the most vulnerable, home buyers, which are first-time home buyers, low-income home buyers of color, and really start to get ahead of this. Kamla posted in the chat that NeighborWorks America has a national helpline to provide guidance on reverse mortgages. And I know they teach a class on counseling around reverse mortgages, and I have no idea what they say. So this was so exciting, you guys. I don't know if that means I'm a total nerd or something, but I found every word of this entire webinar fascinating. I hope all the participants did too. I want to do a little shout out for one of our partners, the Center for Community Progress. They also offer a really nice webinar series called Cornerstone. So check them out, and always, make sure you know what they're doing. Please let us know if you have ideas for webinars, case studies, news stories, etc., that you would be interested in seeing us do. I want to not forget that because we also write up case studies and just finished writing one on the My Home, My Deed, My Legacy effort that John talked about. And it's just about to be finalized. And then we will, when we send out email following up to everyone who registered for this webinar, you will get a link to the slides for the webinar, the recording of the webinar, a list of resources that were posted in the chat, and probably also a link to the case study, because we will have posted that by then. So Ann Barfield says she's still in awe. She's motivated to partner for a clinic action. That's what you wanted, Shakisha. All of these guys are so generous. Do you see how they keep posting their phone numbers, their emails, etc.? I've been trained to feel like I can't call a lawyer without assuming that I'll be billed $300 for a 5-minute call, which is probably not true, but these guys are not your normal lawyers. I think they're being very generous, and I really appreciate it. Final slide. You can learn more about us. There's a book on the Edge. You can buy it at Amazon. That's all about middle neighborhoods, or you can read it for free at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco's website. You can look at our website, middleneighborhoods.org. Unfortunately, we don't own our book. That's a long story. We need a lawyer. And we also publish, so we can't put it on our website, but we also have a newsletter that comes out every other month and usually highlights, the links to our webinars and our case studies and stuff like that. Please become a member of our community practice. We'd love to have you. And thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of our panelists. You guys are terrific. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you for having us.
So good to be with you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.